Dearly and Deviant Daniel, Urban Fantasy Romance. Dearly and the Departed, Book 1. Written by L.A.K. Narrated by Zachary Zaba.
Prologue. Keir Dearly. Summer, 1997. My double bed was shaking so hard I was sure we were having an earthquake. I'd been through a few small ones growing up, but they still scared me. Of course, living in California, we all knew there was the possibility the whole state would fall into the ocean one day, leaving Arizona and Nevada as the new West Coast. When my eyes opened, I was somewhat expecting to be surrounded by water. There were no crashing sounds of anything falling off my desk or dresser, so I assumed it was a mild tremor and turned over to face the window, where the moon was lighting up my room through the second-story window. What I wasn't expecting was to see a man sitting in my desk chair watching me. I was a naive 15-year-old, and I totally thought I was going to die, either at the stranger's hands or out of sheer fright. Please don't kill me. I'm sort of an asshole, but my parents would be devastated. I stammered, trying to remember any prayers besides the dinner one that I learned from Nana Dearly when we used to go visit her in San Francisco after she moved into the retirement community. Nana had been a hyper-religious person, always talking about evil spirits haunting the funeral home. Dad used to laugh and tell her nothing was going to hurt us and that he was careful, though I never knew what he was careful about. How about you leave us alone and you can take my Sega 32X and all my games? My Nokia phone is charging on my desk and I have $134.15 in my middle desk drawer from cutting grass and doing chores around the house. Please don't hurt my mom and dad. I don't know where they keep their money, but I can try to find it. I babbled nervously. The man held up his hand for me to stop talking, which was probably for the best because I tended to be annoying when I was nervous, or scared shitless, as the case seemed to be.
Are you Keir Dearly, son?
My guest asked in a low tone. Considering how large he was, it was a surprise he didn't have a booming voice. Yes, sir. I'm Keir, I responded, equally as quiet. I assumed he was trying to keep from waking my parents in the bedroom next door, which was probably smart because my father knew how to get rid of a body, so to speak.
Keir, will you tell my son I'm very sorry?
The man asked me. Of course, I had no idea what he meant because I didn't know him, so how the hell could I know his son? Who's your son, and what are you sorry for? I asked, as any sane person would do if they woke to find a stranger sitting at their desk at 3 a.m. I glanced at my clock to confirm my guess.
Billy Townsend. I think he's in your class because I've heard your name before. I know he's a bully, but he learned it from me, which is a god-awful thing to teach a child. I'll be sorry about that forever. I tried to talk to your father, but he couldn't see or hear me. Besides, I believe your mother taught you how to be a caring, compassionate young man. All I taught my son was how to be a mean bastard, especially to people he didn't understand. I was the worst kind of person when I was alive, and his mother's probably going to jail for stabbing me in the heart. Please tell my son I deserved to die, and I'm sorry for giving him a terrible example of what a man should be. Okay?
The man's quiet voice was shaky as he seemed to beg me. None of it made a damn bit of sense to me. Billy Townsend was the son of a bitch at my school who I avoided as much as possible because I'd had too many busted lips, black eyes, and a few broken fingers because of his bullshit. The last run-in resulted in the broken fingers because the asshole pushed against my locker door when I had my hand in the way. I wanted nothing to do with the kid, but I was too fucking scared to tell the man I assumed was his father that I wouldn't pass along the message. Hell, I didn't know how to do it anyway, without sounding like I'd lost my mind. Finally, I took a deep breath. Are you going to kill me? I asked the man straight out. He laughed as he shook his head.
No, son, I'm not in a spot to hurt anyone anymore. My wife was justified in what she did, and I hope the cops figure it out quick so she doesn't get mistreated. She didn't deserve to be punished.
The man explained, which had me more confused than anything. Why are you in my room? I asked as the blue and white lights lit up my bedroom walls. I walked over to the window and looked out, seeing an ambulance had backed up to the rear of my home where the receiving bay was located.
When the ambulance driver asked where to take me, the morgue attendant told him to bring me here. I remembered hearing your name from my son and that you lived in a funeral home.
The man explained. My brain was scrambled eggs by then. Dearly and Son Funeral Home was one of several funeral homes in Reardon, California, a town located 20 miles outside of Sacramento. My parents were the funeral directors, my dad the mortician, and I was the weird kid who lived in a funeral home. My father, David Dearly, inherited the business from his father, Paul, and Dad had slept in the very same room as a boy where I now slept every night. As family businesses went, I wished to hell my parents owned a car dealership or an ice cream parlor, but no, we owned a funeral home. With a funeral home, of course, came dead people. That fact alone made me the least popular kid in my high school, not surprisingly. I wanted as fucking far away from Reardon as I could get when I finally graduated, because I'd never lived down the fact that my father was a mortician. Sadly, I took after my father in the looks department, physically embodying the description of anyone who ever owned or worked in a funeral home. Pale, tall, and weird. My skin was like my father's, white as paper, and like my dad, my body temperature ran a cool 97.1 degrees, which meant I was cold all the time. I was a walking stereotype, plus I was shy and quiet, which the kids at school said made me creepy. Add in the fact that I had really dark brown hair and ice blue eyes, and one could only imagine the plethora of nicknames I heard called out when I walked down the hallway. I didn't play sports and tended to be more effeminate than the other guys, so most of those lovely terms of disparagement were on the female variety. Surprisingly, many of the kids at school were afraid of me because I was around dead bodies all the time. It was like they thought me some sort of vampire or zombie who could harm them with a glance. The upside was nobody, aside from Billy Townsend, tried to beat me up like they did some of the other oddballs at school. It was strangely empowering. As I looked at the stranger sitting at my desk, only one question came to mind, though the clarification might suck worse. Are you seriously dead? I asked as I watched the man get up from my desk and walk toward the door of my bedroom.
Yeah. Tell Billy I'll miss my little soldier. Tell him to be good to his mother.
The man told me before he walked through my bedroom door, scaring the living fuck out of me. I didn't go back to sleep for the rest of the night, seeing my breath fog the air as I tried not to hyperventilate. It was creepy as fuck. The funeral was on Tuesday, and from my station by the chapel doors, I saw Billy Townsend crying next to his mother as they sat in the front pew. I was dressed in my suit, as was required by my parents if I wanted to earn the cash to buy my own car when I turned 16 the next year. My stomach flipped at the idea of even seeing Billy, much less talking to him. My job at the service was to hand out programs and assist people into the pews I'd had to dust that morning before my dad brought in Mr. Townsend. I'd helped a few blue-haired old ladies up the aisle to the benches because the guest of honor had been an Army veteran turned town mechanic, and he'd offered senior discounts. I assumed they didn't know the man beat his wife and kid on a regular basis. I paced at the back of the chapel as I watched Billy Townsend and his mother greet those people who came to pay their respects. When Billy walked down the left aisle out of the chapel, I had finally gathered my nerves to approach him. Hi, Billy. I'm sorry about your loss, I offered, louder than I usually spoke. Billy turned to see where the sound came from, his face morphing from sadness to pure hatred at the sight of me. Where's the bathroom, you little puke? I pointed down the hallway and decided to regroup until he came out. A few minutes later, Billy walked out of the bathroom with toilet paper stuck to his shoe and his fly open. I'm sure your dad is going to miss you. Actually, he told me to tell you he'd miss his little soldier, and you shouldn't be upset with your mother because she stabbed him. I offered as I wrung my hands. When his fist connected with my nose, which wasn't really a surprise, I remembered that saying about killing the messenger. It definitely wasn't worth it. On occasion, I'd noticed my father talking to himself around the funeral home, but then again, he'd been labeled as an odd man, or so I'd overheard many people say about him. To me, though, he was a good man, doing a job not many other people wanted to do, especially me. I vowed never to do the work of the dead again.
1. Keir Dearly. Finger pointing, loud laughter. I looked down to see I was naked as the day I was born, and I was standing in front of a group of young people who I somehow recognized, though those in the group didn't make any sense. I knew them from my past, including that damn Billy Townsend, who seemed to be leading the pointing and laughing.
Look at his dick. It's like a green bean. It's a beanie weenie.
Laughter rang out in the room, echoing through my head like shouts bouncing around the Grand Canyon. Waking up in a cold sweat wasn't so much of a rarity these days. How it all started still left me as off balance as it had when I was 15 and was visited by Billy Townsend's dead father. That early morning would change my life forever, though to this day, I wasn't sure if it was for the better or for the worse. I was, once again, in my bed on the second floor of Dearly & Son Funeral Home, having had that stupid dream where I showed up at Reardon High School without clothes or school supplies. I've been having it every night since the day Mom moved, and I didn't see it ending anytime soon. Of course, I wasn't an armchair psychiatrist by any stretch, but analyzing the dream wouldn't require a professional. I was feeling quite uneasy, and I knew why. My mother had just retired and moved to a nice retirement community in Monterey near the beach, and the family business was now completely my responsibility. It was the business that supported the two of us and provided a service for the community, and it was resting squarely on my shoulders. For most of my life, Mom had run the front of house side of things and provided the empathy and compassion necessary for those in need of our services, which had freed my father to do all of the hands-on work required of someone in his profession. After he passed about 5 years ago, I re-evaluated my priorities and realized that Mom couldn't do it all on her own. With my assistance, Mom had hired a mortician recommended by an acquaintance of my father's to do the work Dad had done, but it was soon obvious that fix was temporary. Brent Miller was a recovering drug addict, and Mom believed the recovery part of his journey had taken a far left turn toward overdosing right there in the embalming suite, which prompted me to make changes in my life to make sure Mom wasn't overburdened. Desperate times had called for desperate measures to keep the place open. At least I'd been smart enough to pursue an online degree in mortuary sciences while I was at UC Davis, getting my bachelor's and later my master's in network engineering. In the back of my mind, I sort of always knew I'd go to work with my parents someday when they were too old to run the place alone. And because I'd never imagined myself with a love life of any kind, I didn't have to worry about how a spouse would be affected by my career decisions. I'd quit my job as a computer network engineer, taking my mortician's examination, and stepped up to take Dad's place because, in my heart, I knew it had never really been an option for me not to join the family business. Dearly and Son. Me being said son. Hell, I'd trained for the job my whole life. After passing the exam with flying colors, we let Brent go, though he hadn't gone easily. It had taken my best friend Barry for Brent to see his services were no longer required by way of physically dragging the large man down the driveway into the middle of the street. Mom and I were quite grateful for Barry's assistance. I'd followed in Dad's footsteps at the funeral home, picking up the bodies from where they met their ends, or at the hospital morgue, handling the back-of-house details by preparing the bodies for viewing and burial, and setting up the parlors for services and visitations. Everything had worked like a well-oiled machine between my mother and I until Mom decided she wanted to be around people who were alive versus our usual guests. Of course, I couldn't blame her. She and my father had run the funeral home together for 30-odd years before he died, and I knew it had taken a toll on her to carry on without him. Over the past 5 years since we begun working together, Mom had been slowly, and somewhat stealthily, withdrawing from most of the usual duties she performed for my father. I hadn't really thought much of it until her birthday in December. I'd taken Mom out to dinner to celebrate, and she'd told me she'd decided to retire and move south. I'd wanted to rail against it and beg her to stay with me, but I was a grown man, so I kissed her cheek and wished her well. When Lucy Dearly moved to Monterey, I drove the U-Haul down for her, which was filled with the memories she wanted to take along to her new duplex. After it was unloaded and I was preparing to return to Reardon, I hugged my mother tightly and promised to visit as much as time permitted. I was the third generation and son to run the family business. If I ran it into the ground, it was because I was a shitty businessman and an abysmal failure. I wasn't prepared for the pressure, but was I, a 40-year-old man, supposed to tell my 65-year-old mother she couldn't retire? I didn't really have time to dwell or wonder when the recurring naked in school dream would stop. I had a busy day ahead of me with arranging interviews for staff positions because my best friend, Barrett, had put me on notice. He wasn't going to be able to help me out at the funeral home any longer. He had refused to come over for dinner to my place, and not because I was a shitty cook. He always chose a restaurant between our houses to meet when I had free time. Thankfully, Barry had mercy on me after Mom moved and agreed to help me for as long as I needed him. But the previous afternoon, Barry ordered me to get my ass in gear and hire someone because he was at the end of his patience with my lack of concern for my staffing issues. To further complicate things, there was a body downstairs waiting for me. My guest was Fred Eichner, a 90-year-old man who had died in his sleep and was discovered by his fifth wife when she came into the room to bring him breakfast. Fred's private funeral was being held on Thursday morning. There would be no visitation before the service, and immediately after, his body was being taken to the crematorium down the street. Fred's ashes were to be interned next to his first through fourth wives in the family mausoleum at Suncrest Cemetery. Wife number 5 had a plane to catch at noon, or so she told me when she called to make the arrangements before I sent Barrett to pick up Fred at the family estate. Barrett said Fred's wife, Trixie, had invited him to go with her on a trip, saying her girlfriend had backed out at the last minute. We had a good laugh about that one while we were unloading the poor man's body from the back of the hearse. I laid odds Trixie had dancing in her history, and not on the Great White Way, as Broadway was also called because of all of the white lights on the front of the theaters shining on the street. Just after I got out of bed that morning, the county coroner in Sacramento called to tell me I had a new guest on the way as soon as the autopsy was finished. It was a man of 35. He was the victim of a murder, and I dreaded meeting him. For the first couple of years that I'd been the mortician in residence at Dearly & Son, I'd ignored the spirits who tried to get my attention and get me to help them. As a matter of fact, I hadn't been completely convinced I wasn't losing my mind. I thought about my father walking around the building, seemingly talking to himself, and how I thought the old man might be cracking up. I didn't want my employees, when I finally hired them, to think the same of me. Over the past year, I'd been unable to resist a few of my guests. Their requests had been harmless, and I'd figured out how to couch the deceased's words as if I were merely offering a condolence. That all changed when I met my first murder victim. Corinne Burke was a young woman of 25. She told me that she'd graduated college with a degree in social work, and she'd had a bright future. She'd reminded me a lot of my mother, who'd always been willing to help a stranger in need, and it seemed that Corinne, too, had worn her heart on her sleeve. I opened the garage door to the receiving bay to see a private ambulance backing up to the ramp. I'd received a call at lunchtime from Dr. Joaquim Arroyo, the Sacramento County coroner, telling me that his office had been requested to deliver a deceased young woman to Dearly and Son. Her parents would call for an appointment later that day to make final arrangements, and they'd hired a private ambulance to deliver her to the mortuary.
Keir Dearly?
A young man asked. That's me, I told him as I pushed a gurney near the back door of the large ambulance as he opened it. The guy clearly didn't give a shit about showing respect for the dead. The smell coming out of the back of that vehicle could have given me a contact high. Meet Cora Burke, the guy stated as he glanced at the tag on the body bag on the gurney in the back. Corrine Burke, I corrected the stoned idiot. Help me move her to my gurney, and then you can go. You smoke all the way here? I asked the asshole. The skunk smell rolled off of him like a landfill breeze, so if he wasn't smoking, he had an actual skunk riding in his bus. The stupid dick laughed. Hey, man, I was communing with the dead. I wanted to smack the stupid right out of the guy. After we transferred her to my table, he held out his fucking hand. I slapped it and turned my back. Wait, he stated. I turned around and saw him puff up his chest. I usually get a tip for delivery, you know, like flower delivery drivers and shit. Instead of FTD, call me STD. I looked at him and lifted an eyebrow in question. I had no doubt he was a walking, talking STD, as in sexually transmitted disease. You know, stiffs to deliver? He clarified before he cracked up. I stepped over to him, being taller but definitely not stronger. Here's your tip. Get the fuck out of here before I call every goddamn funeral home I know up and down the West Coast and tell them not to use your boss for transport. You have no respect for the dead, you asshole. You can't do that. Didn't you take an oath to do no harm? He snapped at me. I laughed. No, I didn't. I don't tell the secrets of the dead, but I'll tell every motherfucker I know about you. I snapped as I bumped chests with him. He suddenly stepped back and ran to the front of the vehicle, peeling the tires to leave black marks on my concrete drive. This stupid moron. I went back inside and closed the metal garage door. Miss Burke, I'm so sorry you had to endure that disgraceful behavior. I'm Keir. I introduced myself for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. When I moved the gurney up the ramp and into the embalming suite, I was shocked to be met by a large man with an unhappy look on his face. She fucking shot me! He shrieked. I was taken aback for a moment. Who are you? I asked. I didn't usually acknowledge the spirits, but I listened to them. So far, Corrine Burke had been silent and absent. I had to hope she'd already crossed over. I'm Eddie Wilbert, her boyfriend. She fucking shot me. I looked up to see the front of his plaid shirt was soaked with blood where his heart should have been, which made me want to give Corrine a round of applause without even knowing why she'd shot him. He appeared to be a loud, obnoxious asshole to me. Where's your body? I asked as I slowly unzipped the bag to see Corrine was black and blue. She passed out, and somebody was knocking on the door in her place, so I went out the back. I lost a lot of blood, and I died in the alley. You gotta fucking tell somebody. I'm laying there alone in the alley behind a fucking dumpster, you asshole, the man ordered, as if he held any power over me. I laughed just in time to hear a female laughing along with me. I glanced to my left and then glanced at the body on the gurney. I turned to the spirit and smiled. Hi, Corrine. I'm sorry this lowlife took yours. Can I help you with anything? I asked her, going back on my vow never to converse with the dead again. Corrine smiled, and the light around her was bright. Leave him where he is. He doesn't deserve your kindness. Let him be a John Doe, she requested. So
I nodded. Try your best to make me look okay for my parents. They're good people and don't deserve to see me like this.
Corrine asked. That was an easy request to fulfill. Sure. Anything else? I asked. Corrine's face turned somber.
Be careful talking to the dead, Mr. Dearly. Your father says there's a balance that should never be disrupted.
Just like that, she was gone, and I was stunned. Was my father able to reach out from the other side? Maybe I was losing more of my mind every day. Chapter 2. Dashiell Clegg. Can't you assholes hear the fucking phone ringing? I yelled at the guys working at my shop as I tossed a socket wrench into my toolbox and walked over to the once beige telephone. Fucking thing was probably an antique, but it still worked. The cord had been taped straight a long time before I took over the business. But again, it still worked. Clegg Cycles, I answered, snapping my fingers for them to shut up. I plugged my finger into my other ear so I could hear better over the compressor Simp was using. Mr. Dashiell Clegg? A man asked. People always mispronounce my name, so I went by Dash. Much easier. Yeah, I didn't bother to correct him. Time was money, and he was taking mine. This is Detective Ramon Torres with the Sacramento Police Department. I'm afraid I have some bad news, sir. Your brother, Daniel, was found dead in his office at Lancer Investments this morning. We were wondering if you could come to the station to identify the body as his next of kin on the record. Also, we have a few questions for you, so could you also free up some time? If you need a ride, I'll gladly send a patrol car to pick you up. Today is preferred. The man pretty much demanded. I was stunned at the news that my brother was dead. But wasn't it something I always sort of expected to? Danny had been a wheeler dealer since before he even graduated college, and not a lot of people appreciated that sort of guy. Danny and I really hadn't spent much time together since we were snot-nosed brats, plucking at our mom's last nerve. I'd seen him twice in the last couple of years, and that might have been 2 times too many. Danny had gone to college after high school, with a bright future ahead of him and no concern for our family. I'd gone to jail for working at a chop shop on the north side in Old Sacramento. Got a year for being an accessory after the fact, but it straightened my punk ass out damn quick. Turning 19 in the state prison in Folsom had sucked. When I got out, I swore to my mom I wouldn't so much as toss a gum wrapper in the street, and I'd stuck to my word. Our old man, Lars Clegg, was a Viking through and through. That was his nickname in the Sacramento Sinners, the motorcycle club he rode with for many years. Lars was the one who taught me how to work on anything with a motor, and while he wasn't a role model most people would respect, my dad certainly set an example of a strong work ethic that both Danny and I had followed, whether my brother would admit it or not. Fuck the other guy before he fucks you. My father always told us. We'd both taken his advice, each in our own way. These days, I ran a legitimate business, thanks to Pops, but if you stiffed me, you wouldn't like the way I evened the score. Our mom, Siobhan McCarthy Clegg, was a second-generation Scottish-American. She was a true Scottish beauty with night black hair and big green eyes. Pop loved her with every white blonde hair on his head. Danny and I could get by with a lot of shit when it came to my pop, but crossing our mom got our asses beat without mercy. Personally, if I ever had a kid, I wouldn't lay a hand on them. Of course, the chances of that ever happening were less than nothing, so I didn't really worry about it. I had no grand aspirations of a husband and family, so I didn't have to worry about whether or not to spare the rod. Both of my, and Danny's, parents were dead, having been killed in a bike crash on the way back from Sturgis about 7 years earlier, and I had to believe we'd both miss them very much. I wasn't sure how they'd feel about Danny being dead. Hell, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. I was already dealing with the regret settling into my soul for the relationship we didn't have since we'd lost Mom and Pop. Bottom line, I should have been a better brother to Danny. Maybe I should have kept him from doing whatever the fuck ever he did to get himself killed. But it always seemed as if Danny didn't want to acknowledge that I was his brother at all. We were total opposites, Danny and me, and we usually ended up rubbing each other the wrong way, so maybe it wasn't meant to be that we'd ever be close. Now, it was too late to ever try to do anything about it. Yeah, sure. I'll clean up and be there in an hour, Detective Torres. I answered, having forgotten for a second that I was on the phone with the cops. An hour later, I parked my bike outside the police station on Freeport Boulevard. The old nerves were back. Every time I had to deal with the cops, I relived the fear of that shitty day when 10 boys in blue came busting into Unerstall's body shop, arresting the 6 of us who were stupid enough to take a job working for Tim Unerstall. Obviously, none of us were rocket scientists, but Timmy was the only guy hiring at the time, and you didn't need to take an IQ test if you knew anything about a combustion engine. The day I went to work for Tim, he told me, "Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and do your fucking job, and you'll have no problem with me or anybody else. I got a few cops in my pocket, so I never get on the radar. You work for me, you won't either." Famous last words. Tim's faith in his pocket pals had been without incident until one of the cops got caught picking up a donation to a non-existent police officer's charity from a local business owner. The traitor gave up anybody he knew who had any dirty deals in the hood, and it seemed poor Timmy was number 1 on the cops' hit parade. That stupid bastard would never see the light of day after his asshole cop buddy spilled his guts, and we all went along for the ride right to Folsom. I walked into the police station, heading to the front desk to see a cop, shiny as a new penny, standing there with a big fucking smile.
"Good afternoon. How can I help you?"
Junior G-Man wannabe asked. "I'm here to see Detective Ramon Torres. I'm Dashiell Clegg," I explained. The guy grabbed the phone and punched in a few numbers, watching me and making me more fucking nervous than I'd been the first time I had sex. That hypothetical kid I'd never have. Yeah, I'd tell him to wait to lose their cherry until they were mature enough to accept that people lie about anything to get what they want. Skylar Weber taught me that lesson, the prick, and I was never going to let anybody treat me like that again. No way would I let another guy make a fool out of me.
"Detective Torres says you should go upstairs. He'll meet you there,"
Copper Penny told me as he pointed to a staircase at the end of the hall. I nodded and walked away, wishing that young guy the best of luck. He was going to need it if he ever hit foot patrol. The streets would eat that kid alive. I jogged up the 2 flights of stairs to find a guy waiting for me at the top. He wore a snarl I'd seen 1,000 times. The detective had checked my record and knew I'd been around the cell block. He was ready to find fault with me immediately. It was absolutely nothing new. "Mr. Clegg, I'm Detective Ramon Torres. I'm sorry to call you down here at such a difficult time, but like I said, we need a confirmed ID of a man we believe to be your brother, Daniel Clegg. The deceased was found in an office building downtown this morning when the company opened." The man reminded me of my gruesome task. "Sure. Where do I need to go?" I asked, ready to hot-foot it out of that station as soon as possible. "Come on over to the conference room. You don't have to go to the morgue, Mr. Clegg. The coroner took pictures to save you the trouble. When was the last time you spoke to your brother?" Torres asked. I followed the man, glancing around the large room to see men and women at desks out in the open, none of them paying attention to me as I walked through their space and into the conference room on the other side. The detective took a seat opposite an empty chair and pointed for me to join him. Torres flipped open a manila folder where there were a few photographs. He flipped them face up on the table in front of me, likely for dramatic effect. They were both pictures of Danny, and aside from the fact that it was the first time I'd seen him with his mouth closed in years, he looked like he was sleeping. I felt a lump in my throat I hadn't felt since we'd lost our parents. Yeah, that's Danny. I managed to croak out before I swallowed down tears I damn well wasn't sharing with a cop. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Clegg. When was the last time you spoke to your brother? He asked again. Last Christmas. He invited me to a Christmas party at his condo. He proposed to Shannon that night. Damn. Has anyone called her? I asked, remembering the sweet woman who was foolish enough to fall in love with my whore of a brother. Danny had always fucked around a lot, and I was shocked he'd finally decided to settle down with someone, much less invite me to a party. Please join Shannon and me for a Christmas party. The invitation I'd received in the mail had read. At the party, he'd proposed to her in front of everyone, though he'd avoided discussing anything resembling a wedding date. Hell, the fact he'd narrowed down one woman to tie himself to had been a big fucking surprise to me. The people in attendance that night didn't seem to give a damn one way or the other, which was odd for so-called friends, or so I thought. Detective Torres flipped through his notes and looked up at me. No, we haven't. What's Shannon's last name? We spoke to Daniel's boss at Lancer Investments, and we went over the contacts list in his phone. There were 3 contacts listed as legs, tits, ball, and chain. Since you're his emergency contact, according to the Human Resources Director at Lancer, we decided to ask you which of these are you, or are any of these people known to you? Torres asked. I chuckled because it was all fucking surreal. Ball and chain was how we introduced Shannon Greeley to me before he proposed to her at the party. I got her number if you need it, or will you let me break the news to her? As for Christmas, she hadn't moved in with him yet. I know she travels for her job a lot. She might not know he's... Anyway, I'd like to be the one to tell her. I requested. The man nodded. You don't know the identities of the other 2 contacts? No, but my brother always loved the ladies, especially strippers. I met him once for a beer at a club called Tip Top Gentlemen's Club in Rancho Cordova. That's a good place to start, I'd guess. How was Danny killed? Seemed like something I should ask. All the man told me was Danny was found dead in his office that morning. How it happened hadn't been mentioned. Your brother was shot. We're still working on the details. Do you happen to have a firearm in your possession? The cop asked. I wasn't sure if he was for real or not. I was a convicted felon. I couldn't own a fucking gun, and we both knew it. No, I don't, and I'm sure you know why, Detective. My felony conviction prohibits me from owning or licensing a firearm in the state of California. Not that I'd own one, anyway. I don't have anything I'm so attached to that would cause me to shoot another human being for trying to take it. I responded, wanting to tell the man to fuck the hell off. I glanced at the clock to see it was nearly 5, and I was guessing the guy had to get home to those 2.5 kids to play catch or walk the dog or paint the picket fence in front of his house. Bottom line this for me, Detective. Do you think I killed my brother? I have an alibi for the last 24 hours if you're interested. I taunted because the bastard pissed me off. The arrogant prick only nodded. Well, I got up yesterday morning, went downstairs to my place of business, and opened it up. When Quinn, one of my mechanics, showed up, I walked to the coffee shop next door to buy donuts for him, Georgia, Fish, and Simp, the people who work for me. We ordered pizza for lunch. I outlined for the asshole. He didn't seem impressed, so I continued. Last night, after I closed the shop, I went upstairs to my place, ate ramen noodles, and played Ride 3 on my PS4 until I went to bed at midnight. I got up this morning at 6 and went downstairs to open the shop. When Quinn showed up, I walked to the coffee shop for donuts, and today we ordered Thai food for lunch. I hope you can see where this is going. I challenged him. What's Ride 3? Is it a multiplayer game where you interact with other gamers who could corroborate your alibi? Is there anyone who could corroborate your alibi? A girlfriend, maybe? Torres asked, which pointed out to me that there was nobody who knew what I did with my time except me. I had no one in my life who could vouch for me after I left the shop at night and before I walked into the shop in the morning. It was bad timing to realize it after learning my brother had been murdered, and the cops might have thought I'd been the one to do it. Nope, just my word, which I'm sure you think is for shit. When should I expect the arrest warrant and the new metal bracelets? I've got bills to pay, and I need to get Georgia to show Quinn how to report hours so she can do payroll and billing. I told the man, only half-heartedly joking. The look on his face made me certain I was looking at bars again, and not the kind where I could get a drink and pick up a hot twink. Do you want to confess to killing your brother, Mr. Clegg? A shot to the heart is often considered a crime of passion. Did your brother do something to piss you off enough to shoot him? I can get video equipment in here in a few minutes to take your video statement, and we can take care of this now. The detective replied, as if we were on a timetable or something. I couldn't tell if the dick was joking or not. After staring into his wrinkled face for a minute and wondering if the man had ever had a happy moment in his life, I finally figured out he was dead serious about me making a confession. Nope, I didn't do anything to confess. Guess you'll have to get your shoes dirty out there tracking down leads. Where's my dead brother's body? I asked, ready to be done with his bullshit, and whoever was behind the glass observing the two of us. You can find your brother at the morgue. We can arrange for him to be picked up and taken to the funeral home of your choice, Mr. Clegg. The man suggested. What the fuck do I know about funeral homes? The funeral home where my parents... Wait, that one caught fire last year. Do you have a list of them or something? I'll have to arrange with them how to pay for this until I figure out Danny's financial situation. I stated out loud without thinking. If you give me your cell number, I'll call you after I speak to the coroner's office. They have lists, and they rotate among the funeral homes in the area if the next of kin doesn't have a preference. I'll be in touch. The detective offered a pen and paper, so I scribbled down my cell number and thanked the man, leaving the station to go home and think about how to tell Shannon she wouldn't be getting married anytime soon. After I returned home from the police station, I decided the best thing to do was cozy up with a fifth of Jack and reminisce with my brother's memory. I poured 2 shots in the mismatched glasses on the scarred pine kitchen table, one for me and one for Danny, just like I wished it had been if I hadn't gone to prison and Danny hadn't become a complete and utter asshole. I opened 2 beers and slipped off my boots to prop my feet on the table. I raised my shot glass in the air. Sorry you're dead, Danny, I announced as I knocked back my shot and then his, loving the burn all the way down. When they both warmed my belly, I stared across the table at the empty chair for a moment, letting the booze settle. Who fucking shot you, Danny? Who'd you piss off enough that they'd want to put a bullet in you to be sure you'd be gone for good? I mean, you pissed me off enough growing up that there were times I'd have killed you if I could have. But I'd have strangled the shit out of you and watched your fucking eyes bug out of your head, not giving you a quick exit. I said to nobody. I poured each of us another shot, staring out the window before I slammed them both back. I could have sworn I heard the son of a bitch laughing in that snide way he used to do when he got away with shit and I got the blame. I finally found my balls to make the call to Shannon, figuring I was about as ready to tell her the bad news as I'd ever be. Hello? She answered on the second ring. Shannon, hey, it's me, Dash, Danny's brother. How've you been? You got a minute to talk? Great lead-in, dumbass. I'm okay now. I guess you heard, huh? She asked me. Oh, yeah, I heard about it earlier today. I was gonna come over and talk to you in person, but I needed a drink to sort of settle it in my mind, and Now I shouldn't drive anywhere, I admitted. I took a swig of my beer before I continued. I'm so sorry, Shannon. I feel horrible about it for you. You know Danny and I weren't close. Hell, we haven't been close for most of my life, so I can't imagine how you must feel about it. I offered, not exactly sure what was appropriate to say to a woman who had just lost the man she loved. I'd never had to tell someone the person they'd loved and were preparing to marry had been murdered. Thankfully, she already knew about it, so it wouldn't be a shock.
You've had a few drinks, I see. I guess I didn't realize it would upset you so much, Dash. I mean, we only met the one time, and you seemed so miserable at the party. I appreciate your concern, but I'll be fine. I'm just glad I didn't move, you know?
She responded. Do you think you could help me? I mean, I could really use someone to let me know who I should contact. I admitted. I was 1,000% sure she'd be better at figuring out how to plan a fucking funeral than me.
That's really nice of you, Dash, but all I plan to do is tell my parents later this week when I'm in Cleveland for a layover. I'm super dreading it because they really liked Danny the few times they were around him. I hate he disappointed them like that.
She offered, which caught me off guard. Your parents? Oh, yeah, I guess. Why would your parents be disappointed Danny was murdered? I couldn't help but ask. I supposed if they liked him so much, they would be disappointed he'd been shot, but it seemed a little off to blame my brother for being killed, though I was sure he'd done something to provoke it.
Murdered? What the hell are you talking about?
Shannon asked, which confused the fuck out of me. What are you talking about, Shan? Danny was murdered in his office last night. I had to go to the police station and identify the body, and now I guess I gotta arrange his funeral. Since you're his fiancé, or you were before he died, I thought you'd know better than me what he'd want. We got no family to invite to his service, but I know you two had lots of friends. And there are the people at his office who might want to pay their respects. I suggested.
Holy fuck! I thought you were talking about our breakup, Dash. We broke up last week. I gave him back the piece of shit ring and everything. You're home by yourself. You want me to come over?
Shannon offered. Bless her. I looked around at my disaster of an apartment, and as drunk as I was, I knew that wasn't a good idea. Not tonight. Can I call you tomorrow? Maybe we can meet for coffee and you can tell me what happened between the two of you. I'll still need help with the funeral, and you knew him better than me. I reminded her. No doubt, somewhere along the way, Danny had told her that we really weren't close. Thankfully, she was as kind as I thought her to be.
Sure, of course. Call me in the morning. I just got home this morning from New York and I'm off until Monday, so I'll help you as much as I can. Do you know where the police are sending him? There's a nice funeral home near my aunt's house in Reardon. There's also a beautiful cemetery out there, Suncrest Cemetery. I think it's perpetual care. Do you want me to call someone for you?
She asked. If you don't mind, could you call Detective Torres at SPD and give him the name of the place? Send me a text where it is too, will you? I guess I better go there tomorrow, huh? I asked.
I'll come pick you up at 10, Dash, and we'll go there together. I don't think you should ride your bike after having such an enormous shock like this, nor do I think you should go alone. I'll help you in any way I can. It's not your fault, your brother. I really do want to help you.
Shan offered kindly. I had a feeling Shannon was leaving out a lot of details because she didn't really sound too upset about the news that Danny was dead. Whatever my brother had done to her must have been big. I wasn't looking forward to the story when she was ready to tell it, but I felt like I owed it to her to listen. 3. Keir. I woke that morning and went for a run, trying to mentally prepare myself for the day ahead. Once I returned, I showered and dressed, wondering about my upcoming guest, a male murder victim named Dashiell Clegg. The previous night, I'd received a phone call from Shannon Greeley, who identified herself as the fiancée of Clegg, and said he was supposed to arrive sometime the next morning. Today. She'd arranged transport for the body from the Sacramento coroner's office, and I'd promised I'd do my best to do Mr. Clegg justice. Her laugh as we signed off the call was definitely unexpected. I went to the kitchen to find I'd forgotten to set up the coffee maker early that morning before I'd finally gone to bed. I quickly assembled my special blend and set the pot to brew as I walked over to the bay window in the kitchen to water the plants. "Good morning, darlings," I greeted as I picked up the small spray bottle to mist my orchids. It was where I'd made my happiness garden. In my business, I needed as much color in my world as possible. "Well, you've quite the life, don't you, fruit fly? Plants as friends? I guess nobody wants to hang with the crypt keeper, huh?" The voice came from behind me. When I turned, I saw an unknown spirit sitting at my kitchen table with a smug look on his face. It was just what I needed that morning. A homophobic dead man to bring me down for no fucking reason. "Ah, I bet you were a peach when you were alive. What can I do for you? Your body isn't here, in case you're looking for it," I stated as I went about my business, waiting for the man to outline his. "I'm Dashiell Clegg, and my body will be here later today if the coroner doesn't fuck it up. I was an investment consultant, and I embezzled more money than you'll ever make in this dump in a lifetime. My clients are too fucking stupid to even miss it, but that doesn't really matter. Legs figured it out, a fucking cunt, and I think she told someone. That's how I ended up on the way to your fine establishment," he determined. I really hoped the coroner fucked it up. The spirit continued without waiting for a response from me. "My younger brother is going to end up being framed for my murder because I used his name and social security number to set up bogus accounts, and someone else is going to get rich now that I'm dead. I need you to keep my brother from going to jail for a crime he didn't commit," the man stated with force. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, but I was pretty sure he was already headed in that direction. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from where Dashiell Clegg had started to pace my kitchen floor as he eyeballed me. I almost laughed at the similarity of his name to one of the actors who played James Bond, but I was guessing that he was likely not going to see the humor in my observation since he was now no longer among the living. "I'm a mortician, not a detective, and I'd imagine anyone who murdered you wouldn't take too kindly to a stranger meddling in their affairs. Why is your brother going to be blamed? Who murdered you?" I asked. Seemed as if knowing the answer to the riddle would be a great place to start and end the conversation. "Here's a fun twist. I don't know who shot me, but it was a clean shot through the heart. I was watching a hell of a show at the time. 2 hot women. Well, you wouldn't appreciate it, I'm sure, and I didn't see who pulled the trigger. Good luck with this mess," the man stated before he left the room. I assumed he'd crossed over, having reached his objective. I wasn't about to rush to accuse anyone of murder based on the fact Dashiell Clegg said legs before using a derogatory slur. Fucking cunt. Whatever he'd done to get himself murdered, which he probably deserved, wasn't any of my business. I couldn't see myself investigating his accusations at all. As I mentioned earlier to Dashiell Clegg, I wasn't a detective. Barry appeared in the doorway, startling me because I hadn't heard the bell over the basement door. He looked around the kitchen for a moment before he walked over to the coffee maker and poured himself a cup. "Who were you talking to?" I wanted to laugh, having asked my father that same question over and over again when I was growing up in the house. That had me wondering about things I likely shouldn't, like why I was able to see and hear the spirits around me, but Mom never gave any indication that she had when she was still working with me. I glanced up as my friend went to the fridge and pulled out the milk, adding a large splash to his coffee. He always bitched I made it too strong, but it was my coffee and my coffee maker. My choice. "Want some coffee with that milk?" I teased as I reached for my tablet and pulled up the local paper to check my new ad. I was running a sale, which sounded creepy as fuck for a funeral home, but it was for prepaid arrangements. I wasn't trying to encourage anyone to kill Uncle Bill so they could get a discount on a casket. It was kinder to the decedent's family if one made their own arrangements in advance of that dreaded day. I didn't see it as morbid to consider how a person might want their last soiree to proceed. In times of grief, family members had a hard time making decisions. Prepaid arrangements were a way to relieve them of the responsibility of trying not to look like a cheapskate because they were sure their loved one wouldn't want them to break the bank. They also worried what the guests in attendance would think of them if they bought the bottom-of-the-line box instead of a fancy gold-trimmed oak coffin with velvet lining. If one made their own arrangements, no one could criticize. It was the deceased's last wishes that were to be honored. I wasn't talking to anyone. Why? I lied. Barry would lose his shit if he knew I could talk to the dead. I'd kept it a secret from him and everyone else for 25 years. No need to spill my guts to the man and scare the fuck out of him after all that time. Oh, there it is. Damn, there's a typo. I complained. I'd sent the specifics to the ad department at the Rearden Telegraph the previous week. I was prepared to give a 15% discount to any prospective clients if they called to make an appointment within the next 2 weeks and gave the code PAD and S, Pre-Arranged Dearly and Son. The advertisement I was looking at read 50% discount instead of 15, which was a huge problem. It was then I remembered their graphics department had sent me a mock-up, but I hadn't bothered to check it carefully before I sent it back with a note approving it. I really needed to hire someone who paid more attention to detail than me. Barry walked over and looked at the ad, and then the fucker cracked up. That's gonna cut into profits? You need to hire someone, Keir. I don't mind being an Uber driver for the dead because that new hearse has a sweet sound system, but I don't do administrative work. Hell, I've got Winnie to do that shit for me at the shop. Barry reminded. Barrett Singletary was one of the best sculptors I'd ever met in my life. His chosen medium was metal, and I had a few pieces of his work around the gardens behind the funeral home. Since Mom had retired, I'd been contemplating adding a few more of his pieces in some of the parlors to brighten them up a bit. Barry was going to sketch something for me, and we'd work together to get it just right. But I wanted something with sunshine and a rainbow. It was my passive-aggressive way of rebelling against the stereotype of a funeral home as a cold, death-filled building. Yeah, I don't suppose Winnie would want another job, huh? I asked. Winifred Rollins was his long-term partner, who fought tooth and claw against getting married. I refuse to be subjected to ticking the married box. I'm my own woman, and I don't need a man to support me in any way. She told anyone who asked why she and Barry had never tied the knot. The couple had been together for 22 years and had raised an 18-year-old daughter who'd started her freshman year at UCLA the previous fall to study film. No, she doesn't need another job. Now, what do you need this morning? I've got to get to the shop. My day is booked, Barry told me as he gulped down his coffee and placed the cup in the sink. Mr. Eidner's private service is the day after tomorrow at 10. Would you be available to transport him to Steinbeck's down the street after the memorial? Or do I need to call and ask them to pick him up? I asked. What time? Barry asked. Any time after 11. I think they close at 6, but I'll double check and send you a text. Trixie has a plane to catch at noon, as you recall. Did you tell Winnie about that little adventure the Merry Widow invited you to join? I joked. Barry looked at me with a scowl. What the hell do you think? I'm standing in the kitchen not laying on a slab, ain't I? I thought Jewish people didn't cremate. They usually don't, but since there's not going to be a rabbi or traditional burial prep, I'm guessing Fred wasn't particularly religious. That, or Trixie is sticking it to the old boy one last time. I assessed. It wasn't my business to get involved in the arrangements made by the deceased's loved ones. I did have to wonder how much Trixie loved Fred, though. At least he'd be laid to rest with the 4 other women who had married him for one reason or another. Barry chuckled. Good luck with the interviews for new employees. I can't wait to see how they go. Barry taunted. A second later, he said the phrase I always hated hearing from him. When are you going to get out and meet a nice guy? Let Winnie and me take you out on Saturday night. We can get dinner at Gio's and then go to the new club that opened in Lavender Heights last month. How about it? My best friend was truly a prince among men. We became good friends when Barry offered to help me work out in high school in exchange for me helping him with his chem homework. His parents didn't really put a lot of value on academics because they owned a dairy farm outside town, but Barry wanted to go to college to become a graphic designer and get as far away from the bovine teats as possible. Let me think about it, and I'll let you know. Kisses to Winnie. I told him as I got off my ass to begin my busy day. I had to get in touch with the ad department at the paper to see if they could pull the ad and correct it before I had old people lining up down the block to get a 50% off their dream funeral that would rival one for a head of state. After Clegg's body was dropped off and secured in a drawer downstairs, I went up to prepare for my interview with an assistant. I'd chosen the candidate I believed to be the best fit that afternoon, but I had another candidate I would meet with later in the week if this one didn't work out. I truly hoped I'd mesh with the first candidate, but I had a feeling it would still be damn hard replacing my mother. The doorbell chimed at exactly 12:59 p.m., which was a good sign. I hurried from the office to the hallway, ready to meet Mrs. Genevieve Dassault. I glanced out the small windows next to the door to see a woman in her mid-40s. Her hair was short and styled nicely, and she was wearing a dress with a white sweater over her shoulders and a pair of flats. I was impressed that she was dressed so professionally, so I smiled brightly as I opened the door. Mrs. Dassault, I'm Keir Dearly, I greeted.
Good afternoon, Mr. Dearly. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please call me Jenny. I hope I'm not late,
she offered as she glanced down at her white gold and diamond watch. Clearly, Jenny Dassault obviously wasn't in dire straits and in need of the job. Please, call me Keir. Let's go to my office and have a chat. I received your online application and I'd like to discuss your work experience, I suggested to her. She nodded and followed me down the hallway to my office near the hospitality room. Can I get you anything to drink, Jenny? I asked her. The woman smiled and shook her head. So I opened the file I'd made for her documents and the list of questions I'd jotted down. I see on your resume that you were the church secretary at Sacred Heart of Mary for 10 years. Can you tell me why you left? I asked her. For a moment, her face twisted into that of someone sucking on a lemon tart.
A liberal priest became the pastor, and he encouraged the gays to come back to the church. I find that type of behavior despicable, she said so sweetly that butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. I should have expected something of the sort. I closed the folder and stood, offering her a fake grin. Thank you, Mrs. Dassault, for coming in. I'm sorry to inform you that I'm one of those despicable gays you're so opposed to, so I think we can agree that you won't feel comfortable working here. I'll show you out, I stated. Her face morphed into horror as she grabbed her handbag and bustled out of my office like she was being chased by the devil himself. It was a sad reminder that too many people were bigoted, homophobic, racist, and every other ugly thing I could call to mind. I didn't need to work with it every day. An hour later, I was downstairs in the mortuary, taking inventory to stock up supplies in the event I couldn't find an assistant when the back doorbell rang. I thought perhaps it was Barry, so I dropped my tablet on the prep table and walked out into the receiving bay to open the door. There was a giant of a man standing at the back door, and he didn't look like he came to play. May I help you? I asked him, ready to put the metal door between myself and certain death. Are you Keir Dearly? The large man asked me, a none too friendly tone in his voice. He was about 5 inches taller than me and about 5 feet wider at the shoulders. I glanced behind him in the driveway to see if he had his blue ox, but all I found was a beat-up Jeep Cherokee in an indescribable color. Maybe it was camo? Barry Singletary sent me. Said you needed a driver. I've got my CDL. What do you need driven where? The mountain asked. His head was shaved on both sides, but down the middle was a French braid that ran down behind his back. He had a goatee that was also braided and had a silver bead on the end. He was wearing a pair of long brown shorts, flip-flops, and a tan and brown bowling shirt with a name patch that read, Scotty. Scotty? Is it? I'm afraid there's been a little misunderstanding,
I reached up to open the garage door where the hearse was parked when not in use. I walked outside and over to the front of the behemoth, pointing to it. That's what needs to be driven. Barry was helping me out with driving the. I was truly afraid the man would pummel me if I explained that Barry was probably jacking with him by mentioning the job in the first place. Holy shores! That's a new MK Nautilus legacy. How many miles she got on her? The man asked, surprising the hell out of me. You know hearses? I asked. The man chuckled. Yep, used to work for Kraemer's mortuary in San Diego before I moved here. They had a 2016 Cadillac Armbuster Crown Regal, which was nice, but these Lincolns are the gold standard for hearses. Scott determined as he walked to the front and ran his hand over the hood with admiration and care, which impressed me. The hearse we'd had before the legacy was a 2011 Cadillac S&S coach that had low mileage and was still in great shape, but I thought the large white vehicle looked dated. When I expressed my concerns to Mom after Dad died, she gave me the okay to sell it and buy the new one. I want to be sure you know this job won't take up all of your time. I don't have funerals every day, so I won't need you 40 hours a week. I emphasized in the event Barry hadn't mentioned the amount of time he actually helped me out. Right now, I'm working part-time as a personal trainer, so my hours are really flexible. I'm not bothered by being around dead bodies, and I can bench 450 without breaking a sweat. I think we might be able to make this work. Scotty responded. Okay, if you'll give me your information, I'll be in touch as soon as I know when I'll need you. I told him as I handed him my cell phone. At least I had someone who might be able to help me out in the mortuary with moving bodies. Oh, do you have a suit? I asked him, trying not to sound condescending. Scott quickly pecked in his full name, social security number, and phone number into my contacts. Call me Scott, will you? Yeah, I've got an appropriate suit for the job, Mr. Dearly. No worries. Oh, I also have about another 100 hours of community service to finish, which should take about 2 weeks. After that, I'm all yours. The man offered as he handed me back the device. I thought about asking what he'd done to warrant community service, but as I took in the size of him again, I decided it didn't really matter. Scott climbed back into his Jeep just before the front bell rang, so I closed the garage door and hurried upstairs. When I glanced out the side window, I was surprised to see a young woman with rainbow-colored hair, cat-eye-shaped blue glasses, and a worried look on her pretty face. I opened the door and offered a smile in case she was there about an upcoming or previous guest. Hello? How can I help you?
Mr. Dearly, I presume? I realize my appointment won't be scheduled until tomorrow, but I just didn't think I could wait until then. You didn't hire that awful religious woman, did you? I had a premonition she's not who you're looking for. The strange woman commented. And you are? I asked the bubbly young woman. I hadn't scheduled another interview yet, though I did have another application that had been completed on the job service website. That person had no work experience, so I hadn't yet called them to set up an interview. I'm Amelie Holt. I'm your new assistant, she stated, as if it were a sure thing. I was a bit stunned at her brazenness, but hell, maybe that was what I needed. I hadn't been impressed with the other candidate, so really, what did I have to lose?
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed listening to this sample audio, do check out the complete audiobook, which is now available on Audible/Amazon. Again, the title is called Dearly and Deviant Daniel by Kaye. You can find the links in the description below. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so that you don't miss any of our frequent uploads. Sam E. Kraemer has a weekly episodic story being uploaded in audio format, and new episodes are added more than once every week. The story is called Swim Coach, and it follows the story of a college freshman who goes through something horrific, only to be rescued from this emotional turmoil by his ex-swim coach, aka his crush from the past. Also, please do consider joining our official Facebook group, which is called Kraemer's Clubhouse, where we have loads of fun. If you wish to connect with Sam, you can follow her on any major social media platforms and direct message her there, and she does reply to majority of her DMs. If you wish to support her work and also get access to exclusive materials, why don't you consider joining her official Patreon? The lowest tier support starts at only $5 a month. All the links can be found in the description below. Wherever we see you or hear from you, either it's on YouTube, Patreon, Facebook group, Instagram, please know that we truly appreciate your support. We will be back with a new upload soon. Until then, cheers.